You think you already know Jesus. The sermons, the paintings, the stories you grew up with, they shaped your image of him. But what if I told you there's a side of Jesus that was hidden from you your entire life? I thought I knew him too, until I opened the Qur'an. What I found inside changed everything I believed about Jesus. Like most people, I believed the only place you could truly learn about Jesus was in church or the Bible. That was the picture I carried in my mind for years. But one day, curiosity led me to the Qur'an, and what I found wasn't what I expected. It didn't reject Jesus. It didn't belittle him. In fact, it honored him in ways I had never seen before. It described him as more than a figure in history, as a man chosen by God, given miracles beyond imagination, and respected not just by Christians, but by Muslims all over the world. The shock was real. I discovered that Islam speaks of Jesus with reverence, calling him the Messiah, born of a miraculous virgin birth, performing incredible miracles, yet always reminding us that his power came from God. It was a side of Jesus I had never been told about, a Jesus who wasn't divine, but who was deeply honored, a Jesus who wasn't crucified, but who was raised by God, a Jesus whose story isn't over, because Islam teaches that he will return to complete his mission. That moment made me realize something important. Maybe the Jesus I thought I knew wasn't the full story. Maybe what I had been told all my life was only one version, while another version had been preserved, clear and untouched, for more than 400 years. And that's when it hit me. The Quran was holding truths about Jesus that could change not just how we see him, but how we understand faith itself. This is the Jesus I never knew, and today I want to share with you what I found. When I first opened the Quran, the biggest shock for me was how clearly it described Jesus, not as God, not as the Son of God, but as a prophet of God. At first, this idea challenged everything I had been taught. For years, I had been told that without believing Jesus was divine, my faith was incomplete. But the Quran invited me to look at him differently, not as part of God, but as one of his greatest messengers. In Islam, prophets are chosen human beings. They are not divine, but they carry a divine message. The Quran presents Jesus in this same light. He was born miraculously without a father, he spoke in the cradle, and he performed miracles like healing the blind and raising the dead, but always by God's permission. This wording struck me. It reminded me that even when Jesus did extraordinary things, the power didn't come from himself, but from the one who sent him. Seeing Jesus as a prophet didn't make him less important. In fact, it made him even more real to me. He wasn't distant or untouchable, he was human chosen and obedient to God's will. And in a way, this made his role even more inspiring, because it showed me that greatness isn't about being divine, but about submitting completely to the one who is divine. This perspective stripped away the confusion I always had about the Trinity and divinity. It replaced it with something much clearer. Jesus was never asking people to worship him, but to worship the God who sent him. That's the Jesus I never knew until I read the Quran. One of the most fascinating discoveries I made in the Quran was how it describes the virgin birth of Jesus. I had always been taught that his miraculous birth was proof of his divinity, that being born without a father made him the Son of God. But when I read the Quran, I was stunned to see it fully acknowledges the virgin birth, yet it draws a completely different conclusion. In the Quran, Mary is honored as one of the purest women in all of history. She conceives Jesus miraculously, without ever being touched by a man. But the Quran makes it clear, this miracle was not proof of divinity, but proof of God's power. To make the point even stronger, it compares Jesus' creation to Adam's. Adam had neither a father nor a mother, yet no one calls him divine. God simply said, "Be," and he came into existence. In the same way, Jesus' birth without a father was a sign of God's will, not a reason to worship him. This perspective turned everything upside down for me. For the first time, I realized that the virgin birth didn't have to mean Jesus was God. Instead, it highlighted the greatness of God himself, the one who creates life in whatever form he wishes. By separating the miracle of Jesus' birth from the idea of divinity, the Quran showed me something I had never considered. Miracles don't make someone God. They point us back to God. The virgin birth wasn't about proving who Jesus was. It was about proving who God is. And that realization left me with a kind of peace I had never felt before, because it finally made sense. When I opened the Quran, one detail about Jesus stopped me in my tracks. It doesn't deny his miracles. In fact, it highlights them with reverence. Jesus heals the blind, cures lepers, brings the dead back to life, and even speaks as a baby in defense of his mother. These are extraordinary acts, the very things that made people in my past believe he must be divine. But the Qur'an adds one crucial phrase after each miracle: by God's permission. That small detail changes everything. It acknowledges Jesus' incredible power, but it makes clear that the source of that power was never Jesus himself. It was always God. This reminded me of the prophets before him. Moses split the sea, but it wasn't Moses who made the water part, it was God. Abraham walked through fire unharmed, but it wasn't his own strength that saved him, it was God. Every miracle in history has always pointed back to the same source, the Creator. For me, this was a revelation. In the faith I grew up with, miracles were often used as proof that Jesus was more than human. But here, the Qur'an reframed those same miracles as signs that connect people to God, not reasons to worship the prophet. Jesus wasn't performing them to glorify himself, but to guide people back to the one who sent him. It suddenly felt so clear. Jesus' miracles didn't elevate him above humanity. They confirmed his role as a messenger of God. His power was never independent. It was a trust, a sign, and a reminder of the Creator who controls everything. And once I saw it that way, it was impossible to unsee. One of the most shocking discoveries I made in the Qur'an was how directly it addresses the question of Jesus' divinity. For years, I had heard sermons where Jesus was described as God himself, as part of a divine trinity. But when I read the Qur'an, I found Jesus speaking in words that stripped away all confusion. Over and over again, he is shown clarifying that he is not God, but a servant and messenger of the one who sent him. The Qur'an even records a moment of judgment where God asks Jesus directly, "Did you tell people to worship you and your mother besides me?" And Jesus responds with complete humility, "Glory be to you. I could never say what I had no right to say." That verse shook me to my core. It wasn't an interpretation or a theological debate. It was Jesus himself denying ever claiming divinity. This perspective reframed everything I had been taught. I realized that much of what I believed about Jesus' identity wasn't based on his own words, but on centuries of church doctrines and counsels that developed long after he was gone. The Qur'an, however, preserved a picture of Jesus that felt pure, authentic, and in line with the role of every prophet, before him a human chosen to deliver God's message, not to be worshipped as God. And strangely, it didn't feel like it lowered Jesus. If anything, it elevated him. To see him standing firmly as a prophet, devoted entirely to God, untouched by human exaggeration, that made me respect him even more. The Jesus in the Qur'an wasn't claiming glory for himself. He was pointing all glory back to God. What amazed me most when I read the Qur'an was how it doesn't just mention Jesus in passing. It actively protects his honor and legacy in ways I had never seen before. In a world where different groups argue over his identity, debate his role, and even distort his image, the Qur'an cuts through the noise and presents Jesus with dignity, clarity, and reverence. The Qur'an calls him by titles that show deep respect. Isa ibn Maryam's Jesus, son of Maryam, the Messiah, a prophet, a messenger, and even a word from God. Unlike some portrayals that reduce him to merely a rebel, a failed savior, or a divine figure detached from humanity, the Qur'an honors him as a chosen servant of God whose life was filled with miracles, wisdom, and faith. Another powerful aspect is how the Qur'an defends Jesus from claims that could tarnish his purity. It rejects the idea that he claimed to be God, it denies false accusations against Mary, and it preserves the belief that Jesus' mission was never corrupted by personal ambition. Instead, he is remembered as a teacher who guided people back to the worship of the one God. I realize that in many ways, the Qur'an guards Jesus' reputation more carefully than centuries of human interpretations ever did. Where traditions, councils, and debates have left divisions and confusion, the Qur'an keeps Jesus' legacy safe, unaltered and untwisted. That realization left me speechless. For the first time, I saw a faith that not only included Jesus, but protected him from the distortions of history. The Qur'an didn't erase him, it preserved him exactly as he was meant to be remembered. And that's when it finally hit me. The Jesus I thought I knew was only half the story. The Qur'an didn't take him away from me, it gave him back in his full truth, honored, respected, and protected in a way I had never seen before. It wasn't about choosing one religion over another in anger or rejection. It was about uncovering what had been hidden all along, that Jesus was never erased, never diminished, and never forgotten. In Islam, his words are preserved, his mission is remembered, and his honor is safeguarded for all of humanity to see. For me, that changed everything. It showed me that faith doesn't divide us when we seek the truth. It unites us. It reminded me that Jesus' message was always about guiding people back to God. And that's exactly what the Qur'an has been saying for over 400 years. So now the question is yours. Will you let go of what you thought you knew and discover the Jesus you were never told about? Because once you see him through the Qur'an, you'll never look at him the same way again. If this opened your eyes, don't stop here. Share this message, reflect on it, and if you're ready for more, join me on this journey. Because the truth about Jesus isn't lost, it's been preserved, waiting for you to see it.